The second story is what happened about 50 years ago, and this is when lots of the existing residents of Oak Park, most of whom were white, moved outward into larger, newer, more automobile-friendly neighborhoods with access to some of the new shopping centers on the edge. They weren't moving necessarily terribly far, but perhaps south of Fruit Ridge Road. So they were drawn outward by new housing stock, and then coming in to take over those spaces in the neighborhood were many African Americans. And that's partly because there were more African Americans in Sacramento at that point, many of them attracted as a result of the Second World War and the growing military presence. But also many lost their housing in the west end of Sacramento as it was cleared for urban renewal and the construction of Interstate 5. Oak Park was an unrestricted neighborhood. You see these little want ads for housing at the bottom of the screen. The lower one begins with the word unrestricted. It's for a house in Santa Cruz Way. That means there was no racial covenant on that property. And just for contrast, I give you one on the right, which shows you a restricted district, interestingly enough, Del Paso Heights, which ultimately itself became significantly African American too. The neighborhood certainly was poorer as a result of this transition, and some of the problems that often get assigned to low-income neighborhoods, particularly those with people of color, like prostitution and crime, indeed increased in Oak Park. But Oak Park also became a significant locus for black businesses, for black political activity, for the launching of Sacramento's first African American city council people. So Oak Park became, despite some of its problems, a very, very important black social, economic, and political space in Sacramento. So that's story 2. Story 3 is then the response to that significant socioeconomic and racial change. And part of this was a reaction to what people perceived as old and rundown property. Partly it was a response to property values being now suddenly affordable. And so we get the significant demolition of some of the buildings on the main street, and we also get the appearance in the we also get the loss of some other public services. The buildings are still there. The lovely little neoclassical public library and the prairie-style firehouse are still there as important buildings for Oak Park. Those functions were removed from at least the central part of Oak Park. The affordable property attracted a new major influence on the western part of Oak Park, and that is McGeorge School of Law, who appeared in Oak Park in 1956. And then low-cost, ethnically diverse neighborhoods are also very attractive to artists and bohemians. And so we have a significant entry into the neighborhood of those folks and their businesses. And then finally, more recently, there has been significant demographic change over the past several decades in Oak Park, as in Sacramento generally, as it has become less African American and more Latino and Asian. And that really reflects the fact that Sacramento has become a significant immigrant gateway, really since the influx of folks from Southeast Asia after the Vietnam War. And today, Oak Park is an extremely diverse neighborhood with Asians, Latinos, non-Latino whites, African Americans, some Pacific Islanders, and so on, all well represented in Oak Park. And we are also seeing some significant reinvestment. So we had the initial investment, we had the disinvestment, and now we're seeing some reinvestment, and certainly some gentrification, particularly on the northern side of Oak Park. So here's the poster the advertisement that was placed by Edwin Alsip, and he claimed that this was going to be the greatest auction sale ever held in California. Imagine that. And he bought about 230 acres of William Doyle's farm, subdivided it into 56 whole or part blocks, as you can see here, and then auctioned them off. He got subsidized rail fares to bring people to Sacramento to participate in the greatest auction sale ever. This was moderately successful, although a lot of the blocks were bought up by speculators, people who initially had no intention of building a house right away. What facilitated the development of Oak Park was the arrival of the streetcar, and I realize I should have said 4 streetcar routes rather than lines into Oak Park. So Oak Park is here in this oval, and there were several routes that came here. So here's what we today call Broadway. This was Sacramento Avenue historically, and here is 35th Street. Here's Joyland, currently McClatchy Park. And then the other route came across Fifth Avenue here, and also then joined up and carried you to Joyland. This is the city's very nice map showing historical growth by annexation. And you can see the original Centers Grant, as they label it on here, platted in 1849, and then the beige area, all of which was taken into the city in one fell swoop in 1911. The first time they tried to do this, it was defeated by the liquor interests who wanted to remain in the unincorporated county, thinking that was better for them. But ultimately, the people who wanted city services convinced enough folks, and in 1911, Oak Park and that whole vast area, including what was going to evolve into Curtis Park and Land Park and East Sacramento, joined the city. And notice the scale of the grid, or the density of the grid there in Oak Park, very similar to the original grid in Sacramento, relatively small, narrow lots, 40 feet wide, like in what we currently call Midtown. These are both showing you what's now called Greater Oak Park. So Oak Park began as a fairly modest subdivision, or that place name referred to a fairly small place. However, it now refers to a much larger territory typically. This is the redevelopment area designated by the Sacramento Housing and Redevelopment Agency. It covers about 1,300 acres and goes all the way down to Fruit Ridge in the south. And then the other map, which I've shown here on the right, is to show you the categorization of the land use in the area that the walking tour shows. So the walking tour area is right in here. Here's McClatchy Park. And you can see that this is designated as residential land use. And that shows that the commercial link up 35th Street has to some extent been broken. And we'll see that in the photographs. So here's the route on an aerial photograph. So right here, this red tile roofed building is where we are sitting right now. The tour you will leave from the Lewis building, also known as 40 Acres nowadays, and walk toward the park around this block, over here, back up here, and then you'll end up back at the starting point. Here's the map as it will appear in the booklet you're about to get, and the buildings that are still extant are shown in white, and the numbers that don't have a building outline behind them are, those buildings are no longer extant, but so many interesting, significant things happened at those locations that they are on the tour. So, like I said, we're going to start out at the Lewis building. This was built at the height of the early investment in Oak Park. It was built for one of the major investors in Oak Park, Joseph Lewis. And it was a mixed-use building. Throughout the entire history of Oak Park, since this building was built, you have virtually always been able to get a cup of coffee here and get your hair cut, at least if you were a guy. And then the upper floor is the famous Hotel Woodruff. Several of you talked to us about your experiences there. At times it was apartments, at times it was hotel rooms. But definitely a mixed-use building with some residential and some commercial land use, which is coming back into vogue now and is considered to be smart growth. Well, it was smart in 1915 as well. And the other photograph on here is was one taken when I was leading a walking tour, just to show that this building is today also a gathering point, as it was historically. I will point out that people are watching a parade over there in the photograph on the right. Many of the photographs that the archives have of Oak Park streetscapes are from people taking photographs at parades. So all of you who like parades and have cameras, keep doing that, because in the future those will be valuable photographs. This is the very building we're sitting in. It was originally called the Victor Theater, and I think that was Victor for victory in World War I. Didn't retain that name too awfully long. It became the Oak Park Theater. This is a picture from 1933 that was printed in the Suttertown News quite a few years after that. But I want to point out the bicycles. Lots and lots of people got to the theater by bicycle in that year. So the return of bikes to Oak Park is part of its legacy. This is not the only theater that was on 35th Street. There were 3 of them, including the California Theater, which, again, many people who walked and talked with us also recalled, as well as the now Guild Theater. The Guild name was adopted when it became an art house theater and showed foreign films and art films in the late 1950s and into the 1960s. This is a neo-Moorish facade with this geometric pattern. It's not the Alhambra, I'll grant you that, but nonetheless it recalls that era in theater construction where Middle Eastern sensibilities were considered romantic and reinforced the idea of being carried away when you went to the theater. And it was indeed in pretty poor shape by the early 2000s and was renovated with all the water pumped out of the building by St. Hope. Right across the street is a little commercial building. It was built in 1922, and its claim to fame is it was the first Piggly Wiggly grocery store in Sacramento. And Piggly Wiggly's claim to fame was it was the first self-service grocery store in America. So prior to Piggly Wiggly, of course, you went into the store and the clerk waited on you. But Piggly Wiggly innovated you take the groceries off the shelf yourself. I put Joy of the Gospel Record Center here to indicate that this was a whole series of different businesses throughout its life, and during the period when black businesses were concentrated here, you found things like the Joy of the Gospel Record Center or the Afro Travel Agency. So it's had lots of different businesses located in it. This is one of Oak Park's two bank buildings. The Muddocks brothers, Henry and George, were very important players in Oak Park, important investors, and we'll see the even grander Muddocks building shortly. The Muddockses owned a brick works, and it also produced sewer pipe. And it just so happens that the sewer pipe that the city of Sacramento laid down in Oak Park after the annexation was Muddocks sewer pipe. So there was clearly a relationship here between the private investors in Oak Park and the choice of purveyor of goods to the city of Sacramento. The stop certificate up here from the bank was signed by George Gostick, who owned the meat market that we'll see in just a minute. So this was genuinely a neighborhood bank in the sense that the directors that signed these certificates were other local businessmen. So boy, has banking changed in terms of its scale.